All right, 8:06 p.m., 7/31/2024. Having a little drink. And we're going to finish the month off by finishing the book off of Sister Carrie, where I'm going to read everything else that I didn't read. And possibly Wikipedia too. So let's see. Okay, the table of contents has The World of Theodore, Dreiser, and Sister Carrie, which I think I already read. Might read that again, depending on how long it is. Let's see. No, I won't, because I already read it. Introduction by Herbert Leibowitz. A note on hotels, homes, restaurants, and theater. And notes inspired by, comments and questions, and for further reading. Which is suggestions, I think. All right, so let's dive in, because this is going to take a minute. Yesterday I finished Sister Carrie. I talked a little bit about it with the little time I had left. And again, today I'm going to read the parts of the book that I didn't read. So let's dive in. Okay, this was the introduction. And I purposely didn't read this because I was scared it was going to have some spoilers in it. So let's see if it did, now that I know how the book turned out. And spoiler alert, there will be spoilers in this video. So if you haven't read Sister Carrie, don't listen to this video. Or do whatever you want, but, you know. All right, introduction. Since its publication in 1900, Sister Carrie, Theodore Dreiser's first novel, has incited two kinds of controversy, moral and artistic. When Dreiser submitted his book to the respectable publishing firm of Doubleday, Page & Company, it was initially met with enthusiasm. Serving as a reader, the novelist Frank Norris strongly recommended that the book be acquired. Walter Page also admired the novel. But when Mrs. Doubleday read the manuscript, she argued vehemently that it was an immoral work and urged her husband, Frank, not to publish it. Why? Because the author did not punish Carrie, a kept woman, with death or disgrace, as the wages of sin deserved, but rewarded her with success in the theater and material comfort. Okay, spoiler right in the first, second paragraph. Glad I didn't read it. And this is a casual video, so sorry if you want. Fuck it. All right. So Mrs. Doubleday was PO'd that the harlot Carrie wasn't burned with a scarlet letter. Tough cookies for you, Doubleday. Mrs. Doubleday would not have been swayed by the blunt judgment of an interviewer for the New York Herald in 1907. Sister Carrie reverses the canting code of the cheap novelist. The woman transgresses, but the man pays. She didn't like it. A disinterested judge might construe Carrie's failed pursuit of happiness as a harsh fate. But to the custodians of conventional morality, that argument countenanced exposing vulnerable young women like Carrie to a life of vice. As if they weren't already doing that on their own accord. Even in the wake of the Gilded Age's sensational scandals, the Beecher-Tilton trial, in which influential Brooklyn preacher Henry Ward Beecher was accused of adultery with one of his parishioners, and the murder of the distinguished architect Stanford White by Harry Thaw, a jealous husband, sex was a taboo subject for novelists, to be treated, if at all, obliquely. To his credit, Dreiser stubbornly refused to bow to the publisher's pressure either to withdraw the novel or tamper with its moral vision. Good job, Teddy. You should never do that. I do actually applaud him for not caving into bullshit pressure, because it's not the novel's fault that society's fucked. It's, it's the other way around. These novels works of art wouldn't exist if people weren't so fucked up. Yeah. When the company's legal department advised that Doubleday, Page was contractually bound to publish Carrie, it did so, albeit in a stingy edition of 1,000 plus copies. So, if you can get through all that kind of bullshit, kind of, but not kind of imaginary red tape of like personal feelings and industry politics, where you have the option of having it published or not published, even if it's published at a reduced rate, it's still published. You're still winning in a sense. You might have like lost a battle, but in the end, I think you won the war with this. Norris, however, managed to send the novel to reviewers across the country, so it was read, mainly by writers. In 1901, the British publisher William Heinemann published Carrie to widespread acclaim, and by 1907, after B.W. Dodge and Company reprinted the novel in a substantial edition, Dreiser's American readership had also grown. So one stupid bitch didn't stop this novel from having a life. Good. In affluent periods like the 1950s, the book's reputation dropped because critics savagely attacked Dreiser's artistry, often measuring his flaws against the subtle art of Henry James. Where James was a cynosure, cynosure, of formal innovation and complex presentation of consciousness, Dreiser played the omniscient author in a ponderous didactic style. They grumbled, seldom allowing his characters' traits and choices to unfold organically from the dramatic action. They considered it a blunder to announce in the early chapters of Sister Carrie that his protagonist would never find happiness. Well, for fuck's sake, Richard Yates opened that with his first line in the Easter Parade. So, this kind of goes to show that no matter what people say, if you have an idea, no matter what context it is, in this context, we're talking about, well, it's an expression that's more fleshed out. In this context, in Richard Yates's novel, it's an actual clear-cut passage. Put it forth anyway, and see what the reaction is. See how people relate, how they relate to it, how they react to it, what it conjures up in people's feelings and emotions. Because although, sorry, I'm clearing my throat a lot. Because although people find that abhorrent, that a whole novel will exist, and at the end of it, after everything that's happened, people are unhappy. That's very realistic and very true to life, and unfortunately, universal. So I'm so glad Theodore stuck to his guns. Moreover, where James's prose was intricate and radiant as spun gold, Dreiser's was pedestrian and maudlin. This I won't necessarily disagree with. But Dreiser was the inferior novelist. Okay, when you pit two novelists against each other, two novelist works against each other, you're in a big sense you're talking about apples and oranges, unless you're like pitting them against each other for a prize or like in their genres, or but it's I still feel like I feel like it's unjust to do that, because you're talking about two different people's perspectives if they're in the same vein, in the same genre. Two different people's perspectives based on two different people's experiences. But if we're talking about like a skilled writer, then maybe I could see where they're coming from. But from what I'm reading in this paragraph, I feel like people are more riding the train of the fad at the time, and not necessarily the skill. But maybe it is the skill, and maybe I'm wrong. But onward. Such changes would not have fazed the author. Sister Carrie, he remarked in a 1907 New York Times interview, was intended not as a piece of literary craftsmanship, but as a picture of conditions done as simply and effectively as the English language will permit. Dude, I'm liking him more and more because he's owning up to the fact that, yeah, I'm not the best there ever was. That's not the point. I was writing a novel. I was writing a novel based, again, on my experiences, how I saw them, and essentially filtering it through a story. Dude, I love this. Indeed, during times of depression, when the country was racked with social and economic conflict, bringing hardship and ruin in its wake, Dreiser's novels moved readers because they brilliantly demonstrated the human costs of an unregulated system that enabled the high and the mighty to flourish, while a huge segment of the population struggled merely to subsist. Dreiser understood that the dirty secret of American society was class. Not only its injustices and injuries, but the dreams of power and money, status and fame that it inspired. Nonetheless, it would be foolish to ignore his detractors' misgivings or to dispute Dreiser's occasional clumsiness. His tedious repetitions of words and motifs, his fondness for pontificating about women's emotional makeup, and the banality of some of his images. For example, he describes Carrie several times as a wisp in a vast sea. Because she is. She's one of the masses that's fighting against the tide to find her place. So fuck him, right? For describing her as such. No. No, I'm on Theodore's side here. But Dreiser's faults, though noticeable and annoying, count for little when weighed against his strengths. Among them, his psychological acumen. He grasps the elemental force of self-interest and illusion, he calls it elfland, that drives people's lives. And the sturdy structure he devises for Sister Carrie. Carrie rises from the poor, unformed waif to theatrical celebrity, while her lover, Hurstwood, falls from prosperous tavern manager to beggar and suicide. Despite chapter headings that spell out explicitly, as in a popular melodrama, the war between desire and conscience, flesh and spirit, Dreiser refuses to accept William Dean Howell's bromide that American novelists should focus on the smiling aspects of life. Of course they fucking shouldn't. You should focus on whatever speaks to you and channel it in a way that you want to. Beautiful factory girls from down-at-heels families do not, in Dreiser's novels, defend their virtue and then, at the curtain, marry the handsome scion of a rich industrialist and live happily ever after. Morality in Sister Carrie consists of shades of gray. Dreiser is a sober, uncompromising realist. Above all, Dreiser excels at Above all, Dreiser excels at anatomizing the pathologies and inequities of American life. Anatomizing. Personifying, maybe? In particular, the profound gulf between rich and poor. Maybe personify isn't the right word. Maybe anatomizing is the right word. Like his contemporary, the pioneering social worker Jane Addams, he deplored the fact that a small number of people accumulated enormous wealth, while the vast majority of citizens lived in abject poverty, working long hours at dangerous, soul-killing jobs for meager pay. When Carrie is hired by a shoe factory at a salary of $4.50 a week to stamp holes in uppers, she recoils from being a cog in the machine, one of several nondescript, clattering automatons. The prospect of a future shackled to a dull routine demoralizes her. It does not take her long to notice and to envy the conspicuous consumerism on a grand scale that surrounds her in Chicago and later in New York. The magnificent residences, the splendid equipages, the gilded shops, restaurants, resorts of all kinds. The flowers, the silks, the wines. For Carrie, Chicago's Vanity Fair, with its array of showy goods, promises unimaginable satisfactions. For Dreiser, and this is the solemn major theme of Sister Carrie, money confers neither freedom nor spiritual contentment. It's very, very important. Whether you haven't, this is a personal opinion, whether you have it or you don't, you will always be, I was going to say a slave, but be beholden to money. It's the power that you give it that takes hold over you. and I think people who think people that have more money are more free, because they are in a sense, but they're still funneling their time and energy into an artificial image of themselves for other people. So they're still beholden to their wealth and status. And that robs them of their individuality and their life's fulfillment. Sister Carrie is the fictional complement to Thorstein Veblen's sociological classic, The Theory of the Leisure Class, and the American cousin of Flaubert's Madame Bovary, both of which I've picked up and set down. I've picked up and set down. I think I tried to read Madame Bovary and didn't get very far because I got lost in the sauce. And Veblen's The Theory of the Leisure Class, I have it and haven't read it, but these are the titles that keep coming across my eyes, and I have both. There is a clear-cut autobiographical basis to these attitudes. Dreiser's childhood and young manhood schooled and scarred him. He was born in 1871 in Terre Haute, Indiana, into a large, impoverished family. His father, a German Catholic, was barely able to scrape together a living, so that his pious Mennonite mother took in washing. It was not uncommon for the children to go to bed hungry. Theodore was a shy, repressed child who spent hours reading, or like Carrie, whiling away time daydreaming. His 4 older sisters and 2 brothers all rebelled against the puritanical morality of the Dreiser household. Without moral qualms, the sisters traded sex for fashionable clothes, jewels, and creature comforts, all the traditional prerequisites of status. It says perquisites, but I think perquisites? Maybe it's how. In fact, the plot of Sister Carrie is closely modeled on the love life of one of those sisters, Emma, who eloped with tavern manager E.A. Hopkins. Dreiser's 1911 novel Jeannie Gerhardt centered on the life of another sister, Mary Frances, Mame. His brother Paul changed his last name to Dreiser and became the celebrated songwriter of By the Banks of the Wabash Far Away, and other popular ditties, and a successful ladies' man. Theodore, by contrast, patched together a ragged education, attending public schools where he did not distinguish himself a student, and for one wasted year, Indiana University before dropping out. Sex obsessed and tortured him. For a few years, he knocked about, supporting himself with odd jobs until he finally found a vocation as a journalist, a major turning point in his life. His stint as a reporter on newspapers in Chicago, Pittsburgh, and St. Louis honed his writing skills and gave him a daily front-row seat to witness and to reflect on the casualties of social turmoil. He covered the bitterly violent tram strike in Akron, Ohio, and sympathized with the plight of the exploited workers and their families who fought the intransigent corporations, Pinkerton guards, and scabs so desperate for work they would risk their lives for a paltry few dollars. Dreiser's beat ranged far and wide. He prowled city streets and ethnic neighborhoods in search of human interest stories, talking to prostitutes, maids, clerks, actors, doctors, teachers, and people who bought furniture on the installment plan. He interviewed ruthless financiers whose meteoric rise was due to an aggressive will and a monomaniacal ego and an eye for the main chance. men who did not shy away from resorting to bribery or other corrupt practices in order to acquire and wield power. Chicago's economic and social stratifications were as familiar to Dreiser as his own hands. America, Sister Carrie suggests, is a divided nation. The residents already inside the walled city are dominated by the moneyed class. They flaunt their wealth like peacocks and dine in ornate restaurants. Dreiser despised the unwholesome gargantuan meals enough to feed an army, devoured in these elegant culinary palaces. Next in importance are the politicians who control patronage, dole out jobs for their needy constituents, and line their own pockets with graft. And then come the celebrities whose pictures adorn theater posters and the rotogravure sections of Sunday newspapers. Dreiser likens the powerful and rich to whales, lords of the sea. A common fish must needs disappear wholly from view, remain unseen. Carrie's almost blind instinct helps her to avert this hapless destiny. Instead, it is Hurstwood who drowns in that sea. On nearly every page of the novel, Dreiser evokes the spell wealth casts on its characters. Cities, he notes again and again, are magnets, and thus social laboratories, for all sorts of people looking to improve their lot. In the 1890s, Chicago's expansion accelerated at a frenzied pace. New buildings sprang up on every block. The cocky city seemed to offer unprecedented opportunities for success to those who could ride the crest of this wave. In the first half of Sister Carrie, the lower rungs of the social hierarchy, the factory workers and the large armies of the unemployed, the ill, the petty criminals, the unassimilated immigrants, and the poor unable to fend for themselves, lurk in the shadows of Dreiser's canvas. But in the second half, when economic distress spreads hunger and despair across New York City, they occupy more of the foreground. Into this volatile urban atmosphere steps Carrie Meeber, a naive, wide-eyed wayfarer from a small town in Wisconsin. Eager to escape the boring parochialism of her upbringing, she has no marketable skills to win the notice of prospective employers. She is morbidly shy and afraid of rebuffs, and she possesses little more to distinguish her than a pretty face and a trim figure. A brief taste of her sister's narrow existence, all toil and no pleasure, and of the monotony of factory work distresses her. Privation staring her in the face, she is rescued by Drouet, a drummer, which is also known as slang for traveling salesman, who had befriended her on the train from Wisconsin. A glib, good-natured egotist who enjoys the company of women and flirts in a style of superficial gallantry. Drouet coaxes her into letting him buy her a skirt, jacket, and hat at one of the glamorous new department stores and setting her up in a charming, airy flat. Carrie feels no passion for Drouet. What seduces her are the material things he lavishes on her: clothes, pleasant rooms looked after by a maid, dinners at brightly lit restaurants, evenings at the theater, and carriage rides through Lincoln Park. When Hurstwood and Carrie meet, he woos her in a wily campaign to detach her from Drouet. Weak-willed and unworldly, Carrie cannot see through Hurstwood's suave niceties. She is flattered by his solicitude, by the flowers he sends, clandestine meetings in the park, discreet love letters. She is mildly uneasy at their liaison, but her conscience does not nag at her. At Fitzgerald and Moy's, a fancy saloon where he serves as manager, Hurstwood is adept at small palaver. In bonhomie, his manners more polished than his rival Drouet's. He knows when to drink with his customers and when to keep his distance. Dreiser describes this male preserve, another layer of social life in Chicago, in detail because it furnishes clues to Hurstwood's character. Hurstwood delights in looking around the posh watering hole and watching boxing champ John Sullivan hold court at the bar. While in the back room, ward bosses drink whiskey, smoke cigars, gossip, tell risque stories, and cut shady deals. Hurstwood owns a piece of the American dream of success. When Carrie wins plaudits in her stage debut before an audience of Masons, it is Hurstwood also, acting as impresario, brings a friendly clack to the amateur theatrical night. With consequences he cannot foresee, he boosts her self-esteem and plants in her mind the seed of the idea that she might have a career on the gilded stage. Throughout the novel, Theodore fuels in her a love of the limelight and of the magical paraphernalia of disguise. Carrie may seem like an implausible candidate to make a splash in the big city pond. At first, as a mere member of the chorus line, she is, Dreiser comments dryly, absolutely nothing. But her pert appearance soon lands her more substantial roles in trivial entertainments, and through a combination of luck and an appealing stage presence, she gradually rises into the empyrean of minor stardom. The gates of the walled city now swing open to admit her as one of the privileged. As Carrie Medenda, her name appears in gossip column squibs, and her face is prominently displayed on flyers and theatrical placards. And in the glossy brochures the publicity mills print. But while she takes pleasure in what money buys her, a suite in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, a carriage to take her to and from the theater, elegant frocks hanging in her closet, adulation, her inner life alters in only small ways. She is glad to have sloughed off the identity of a servile petitioner, but her fantasies of happiness lie beyond her grasp to fulfill. When the idealist Ames criticizes the creaky dramatic vehicle she plays in as popular rot of the times built to hackneyed formulas, Carrie earnestly longs for that which is better. She grows smart enough to brush off the sycophants and gigolos who send her mash notes and promise her the moon. She appreciates refinement and the force of a superior man like Ames, a cool moralist and occasional mentor who observes the Gilded Age's excesses without being disordered by them. But he ventures no romantic approach toward her, as if she is a curious, if sympathetic, victim and specimen of the zeitgeist's skewed values. Wishing to improve herself culturally, Carrie takes his recommendation that she read Balzac's Pierre Goriot, but she cannot escape her fate of permanent loneliness. Carrie is a pitiable, not a tragic character. She lacks dimension, an active will, a daring imagination, and a reasoning faculty that might lead her to spiritual enlightenment. In the novel, she is bruised by experience but never smitten by a passion, love, or moral betrayal that shakes her to the core of her being, as, say, Isabel Archer is in Portrait of a Lady. Dreiser originally ended Sister Carrie with Hurstwood's suicide, but he decided to add a coda that sums up Carrie's emotional impasse and his verdict. Although pitying the blind strivings of her heart, he condemns her to pursue that halcyon day when she should be led forth among dreams become real. In the prime of life, she rocks poignantly like an old grandmother on a main porch, her memories mostly ashes. Spoken in the voice of a biblical prophet, Dreiser's final words clang shut the gates that bar her entry into the vale of soul-making, to use Keats's beautiful phrase, that she desires. In your rocking chair by your window shall you dream such happiness as you may never feel. Dreiser's portrait of Hurstwood, by contrast, is haunting and harrowing. The slow disintegration or decomposition of his personality is a triumph of the novelist's art. As his business prospects in New York turn sour, he lacks the effrontery and drive to get ahead in its highly competitive atmosphere. Hurstwood begins to flounder. He fitfully seeks employment, timidly reenacts Carrie's discouraged moods when searched for work in Chicago. hesitant, fearing rejection, inventing pretexts to stay home. One by one, the gregarious, confident layers of his self peel off, and he surrenders to longer and longer bouts of inaction and brooding. Like Carrie, he sits in a rocking chair, absorbed in the flow of random thoughts and jumbled feelings. Each stage of his decline is marked by some physical gesture: his shabby clothes, stubbly beard, and haggard face, his insatiable scanning of newspapers, his long hours lounging in hotel chairs in order to keep warm and pass the long afternoons, his demented counting of his money as it dwindles, especially after his desperate attempt to recoup at the poker table fails, and his scrimping on food to save pennies. As Firstwood turns into a debased version of his former self, uncouth, surly, pathetic, repulsive, Carrie feels increasingly alienated from, then ashamed of him. The relationship unravels with neither protest nor self-justification from him. And the nadir of his degradation, he decides to ask her for money. But gazing at her lionized image in front of the theater, he knows that they now inhabit separate spheres, that her orbit is remote from his, and he slinks away. "What's the use?" he mutters, the same words he utters before taking his own life. Hurstwood rallies once when he trudges to Brooklyn to sign up as a scab during the trolley strike. It is the most vivid scene in Sister Carrie. With stoic mien, he endures the taunts and violence directed at him by the hostile, frustrated workers, but his threadbare clothes cannot protect him from the cold. That demoralizing episode is Hurstwood's last glum hurrah before he annihilates himself. He is corrosively lonely, like a Christ in a Pietà, without a merciful mother to grieve for or console him. The ultimate indignity is that he is buried in a potter's field grave. In death, he has become, literally, a nobody. A cruel symbol of the peculiarly American theme Emily Dickinson posed with mocking humor. I'm nobody. Who are you? For Dreiser, obscurity in America is a mortifying fate. Distinction is the summum bonum, the holy grail. How it is to be attained is the process that Dreiser dissects with the analytical skills of a forensic anthropologist. Hang on. I'm gonna blow my nose. In Sister Carrie, there is no iron law or invisible hand that determines character, no single implacable force that governs human relations. To be sure, although no disciple of Karl Marx, Dreiser graphically depicts the grim conditions that limit and burden the lives of the proletariat. The word had little currency in America except in socialist circles. If, like Hurstwood, he sided more with the workers than with the capitalists, he did not underestimate the will of the latter to crush the laborers. Some of the novel's most memorable scenes visit the lower depths. Dreiser is kin to the Ashcan school of painters, where the desperate broken ranks of the defeated loiter. The homeless lining up for a loaf of bread or shivering in frigid weather while a maverick social worker flits in from the shadows and solicits coins from affluent passer-by to house the men in a Bowery flophouse for the night. Dreiser does not flinch from exposing the raw, supporting wound of the body politic, though he pushes no reform agenda. There are no settlement houses in Sister Carrie to succor the despised, the losers, the pariahs. Faith also plays no role, since religion is virtually absent from the lives of his characters. The rich do not flock to fashionable churches on Sunday, nor is God blamed or appealed to for help. The god most worshipped is Mammon. The closest Dreiser comes in Sister Carrie to a philosophical absolute or a social theory is his statement that mankind is stranded in evolutionary limbo, too far removed from natural instinct to behave according to its dictates, and too inchoate to govern the self according to the dictates of reason. This belief is played out and tested in the pivotal chapter in which Hurstwood debates whether or not to steal money from the safe at Fitzgerald and Moy's. Dreiser builds the scene shrewdly. Although secure in his position as manager, which affords him a comfortable income and a small cachet, Hurstwood has grown estranged from his wife and children. Mrs. Hurstwood, a pythoness in humor, is content so long as her social climbing ambitions for herself and her daughter Julia are indulged with a season ticket at the racetrack, chic clothes, or a holiday at the fancy Wisconsin resort where she can maneuver, like Mrs. Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, to marry her daughter to the son of a prestigious family. Using Julia's beauty as passport, she succeeds. In a brief scene near the end of the novel, the triumphant mother and daughter... Okay, I think this critic fucked up. It's not Julia, it's Jessica, right? I think he fucked up. Using Jessica's beauty as a passport, she succeeds. In a brief scene near the end of the novel, the triumphant mother and daughter, rich trophy husband in tow, lounge on a Pullman train and chat about their imminent sojourn in Rome. A cameo that ironically reminds the reader of Hurstwood's furtive nocturnal flight from Chicago after he steals the money. Once news of her husband's courtship of Carrie reaches Mrs. Hurstwood, she lashes out like an avenging fury. Since ownership of their house is legally in her name, Hurstwood is without a weapon to fight back. Faced with an ultimatum from his wife's lawyer that he pay her a large sum or face public exposure as an adulterer, he wavers. At this point, an element of chance becomes a crucial variable. The safe, normally locked, is left ajar. Hurstwood wrestles with the angel of moral quandaries. Should he take the money or not? He knows that there will be disastrous consequences if he's caught. Humiliation and disgrace, even jail. But although he can still distinguish between good and evil, the habit of virtue has loosened its hold on him. Reason deserts him. He drifts into his momentous decision, and that verb, drifts, is Dreiser's metaphor for the wayward impulses and rhythms of the passive, yearning, befuddled, half-conscious mind. Carrie often succumbs to this maundering state too. After an agonizing inner debate, Hurstwood steals $10,000, spirits Carrie away by the ruse that Drouet has been hospitalized, promises to marry her, and runs off like a criminal to escape detection. This ethical lapse sets in motion Hurstwood's downward spiral from fastidious comfort to death by asphyxiation in a room on Skid Row. In etching the wreckage of Hurstwood's life, Dreiser finds his own compelling voice and reveals the pity and terror in American tragedy. Whew. So this was by Herbert Leibowitz. He is the editor and publisher of Parnassus, Poetry in Review. His books include Fabricating Lives, Explorations in American Autobiography, and Hart Crane, an introduction to the poetry. He is currently writing a critical biography of William Carlos Williams. And I don't know when that was written. This little introduction. Well, let's see. 2005. Okay, so almost 20 years ago. Thanks, Herbert. Okay, and then the next section, we have notes on hotels, homes, restaurants, and the theater. This is a little set. Another one by Herbert. All right, lay it on me, Herbert. Dreiser's sister Carrie is a rich mother lode of information about American social history. As a newspaper reporter in Pittsburgh, Chicago, and St. Louis, Dreiser met people of all classes. He interviewed factory girls and bosses in sweatshops and dandies, merchants, salesmen, and actors in fancy bars. And he listened to quack spiritualists spin their webs of deception. He observed where the people with money shopped, dined, entertained, socialized, and vacationed, what material possessions they coveted and purchased to decorate their homes, what newspapers they read, what clubs they joined, what they wished for their children. But he was also a connoisseur of the economy of scarcity. He wrote of the poor who struggled to keep their heads above water, toiling long hours for low wages, being maimed in workplace accidents, dying young. After the fire of 1871, Chicago rose from the ashes and grew at an amazingly rapid pace into a modern city. It was a brash frontier for advanced ideas about architecture, merchandising, transportation, and social work. For those who sipped at the heady brew of success, it was bliss to live in such times. But of course, many fortunes were built on the backs of the workers, often immigrants, who flocked to Chicago in search of employment. This vast underclass daily faced a series of grim realities. In their short, brutalized lives, they experienced extremes of deprivation and despair. All this Dreiser chronicled in his novels with little editorializing. For him, images of gaunt homeless men scavenging for food and shivering in the cold were worth pages of polemics. One of the signs of a secure or unsheltered life was the home you lived in or the hotel you stayed in when you were traveling. Throughout Sister Carrie, Dreiser describes the interiors of the residences, from the cramped quarters of Carrie's brother-in-law Hanson, who works at the stockyards, to Hurstwood's comfortable bourgeois house, to the cozy flat Drouet rents for Carrie. And although Dreiser never takes us inside the plutocrats' mansions, they were a point of civic pride and envy. Carrie drives by these symbols of material success in a carriage and marvels at them, much as tourists in Hollywood gawk at the homes of actors. In Sister Carrie, one can almost compile a directory of Chicago and New York hotels that would accurately track the fortunes and status of the novel's characters. When ambitious, confident traveling salesmen like Drouet traveled to Milwaukee or St. Paul on business, they measured their success not only by how many orders their customers placed, but by how grandiose the hotel they stayed in was. When Hurstwood's wife forces him out of their home, he consoles himself by spending the night at Palmer House, Chicago's most elegant hotel. On the lam, Hurstwood chooses a hotel in Montreal that he hopes will conceal his identity. Detectives are on his trail. Arriving in New York, he registers in a hotel respectable but not expensive, that his friends are unlikely to frequent. He is mortified at the prospect of encountering old acquaintances who will know the reason for his flight. When Hurstwood's fortunes begin to decline, he idles away wintry afternoons in a lounge chair at the newly constructed Broadway Central Hotel, keeping warm. When he becomes indigent, he seeks work at this same hotel. He performs menial tasks in the basement. The irony of his drastic change of fortune is not lost on Hurstwood. Free-falling into the social abyss, he passes a night in a third-rate hotel on Bleecker Street, or an unheated Bowery Fleabag hotel in the company of bums and other lost souls. He turns on the gas jets in just such a squalid room. By contrast, as Carrie's reputation as an actress grows, she is courted by such posh hotels as the Wellington and the Waldorf to move into their spacious suites with all the latest amenities. Caught up in the machinery of publicity and status, the hotels are eager to associate their names with Carrie's glamour and celebrity, and so they offer her a handsome discount. In the novel's last image, Carrie sits by a window in a rocking chair, lost in reverie. The space she occupies in the Waldorf is sizable, but she remains trapped in a gilded cage. Restaurants are another pivotal setting in Sister Carrie. At Carrie's sister Minnie's home, the meals are simple and monotonous, if adequate. Part of Drouet's campaign to woo Carrie entails treating her to meals in restaurants like the Old Windsor, which served robust fare like sirloin steak, roast chicken, and asparagus in an ambience that was warm and welcoming. For Carrie, it is like being a guest at a royal banquet. The prices astonish her, but the glowing lights, the food, and the attentive service, Dreiser stresses, awaken other desires and hungers. In the New York section of the novel, A dinner at Louis Sherry's is an important set piece, with Mr. Vance playing the knowing host and Ames, Dreiser stand-in, as acerbic cultural critic. The Gilded Age was notable for excess and extravagant self-indulgence, its Lucullan feasts rivaling those of the ancient Romans. A stern moralist, Dreiser makes no bones that he disapproves of the immoderate eating. 7-course meals that featured oysters, foie gras, I can never say that, foie gras, fuck it, roasts, rich sauces and desserts, champagne and vintage wines. The decor at Sherry's is equally a gaudy display of luxurious good taste. Tiffany lamps, fine china, glassware, and cutlery, all meant to flatter the restaurant's upper-class clientele for their superiority in patronizing it. Carrie is enthralled by this gastronomic temple, but her enthusiasm is tempered by Ames's disgust with the vulgar wastefulness. What especially peeves him is the ostentation, the expensive clothes and jewels, the enormous effort and cost to strut and be seen, as if Americans were copying the chic Parisians of La Belle Époque. Dreiser's growing up hungry doubtless affected his harsh view of the pretentious upper classes and his empathy for the poor who barely can find a crust of bread to sustain them. Theater of all genres, vaudeville, Shakespeare, musicals in which choruses of scantily clad girls danced in ranks like the Rockettes, melodramas, drawing room comedies, was immensely popular in America after the Civil War. However, the country did not produce a single major playwright in the 19th century. The old Puritan hostility to theater as Satan's way to corrupt morals weakened, but did not disappear. Great theater requires a unified culture, and America, in many ways, was a splintered society. Theatergoers clamored for entertainment and uplift, romances and laugh. Okay. Theatergoers clamored for entertainment and uplift, romances and laughs. Many Western towns sported an opera house on whose stage road companies might perform Dion Boucicault's London Assurance, Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, or lurid melodramas and sentimental plays about love and betrayed and redeemed. Okay, so kind of like, I don't know, universal theater that everybody can enjoy with no immediate depth, I guess. Audiences' tastes were promiscuous and undiscriminating. They rarely wanted to be challenged. Although theatergoers in big cities like Chicago and New York may have been more prosperous and sophisticated than, say, their Central City, Colorado counterparts, they too enjoyed spectacle, gorgeous costumes, colorful sets, and musical ballads, as well as elaborate dance routines, risque repartee, or the tale of a villain saved by the love of a virtuous woman. The tired businessmen who go to Carrie's musicals adore her as a charming, comely woman whom they dream of making their mistress. Women of wealth and leisure, the chief consumers of theater, were perfectly content with conventional drama. Dreiser contemptuously describes one example. The play was one of those drawing room concoctions in which charmingly overdressed ladies and gentlemen suffer the pangs of love and jealousy amid gilded surroundings. They have the charm of showing suffering under ideal conditions. For Dreiser, the realist, such pandering to illusions was base and offensive. Ames serves as his mouthpiece to skewer such meretricious theatricals. The theater on the streets, particularly on matinee days, eclipsed the tepid or silly dramas inside the playhouses. Dreiser is fascinated by the Smart Set's ritual pageant as its members stroll down Broadway. There gathered before the matinee and afterwards not only all the pretty women who love a showy parade, but the men who loved to gaze upon and admire them. It was a very imposing procession of pretty faces and fine clothes. Women appeared in their very best, hats, shoes, and gloves, and walked arm in arm on their way to the fine shops or theaters strung along from 14th to 34th Streets. Carrie is as dazzled by the pomp and fashion as she is by the play's romantic chimeras, but lacking Mrs. Vance's self-assurance, she feels disconcerted by the men ogling her and self-conscious about the cut of her dress. She longed to feel the delight of parading here as an equal. In the 1890s, women, even those with an education, had relatively few outlets for their talents, and uneducated women had few choices and faced the bleakest prospects. They could work in factories or marry and take care of their children. A small number of lucky ones could teach or work as nurses and midwives. For a fallen woman like Carrie, the possibilities for a career were severely limited. But being an actress afforded the single woman more sexual latitude than her housewife sisters, and a chance to earn large sums of money. Dreiser does not condemn Carrie for her moral slips. She does not wear a scarlet letter on her bosom, but he does punish her nonetheless. Like Hawthorne's Hester Prynne, she cannot fashion an entirely new identity that would be in harmony with her dreams of happiness and self-fulfillment. Herbert Leibowitz. So I said that earlier. I had not read this yet, but I was talking about Scarlet Letter, of which she isn't on the surface embossed with, but she has the scar tissue of it underneath. She's damned a different way. Dreiser does not condemn Carrie for her moral slips. She doesn't wear it on her bosom, but he does punish her. Very interesting. Okay. Let's see. I was going to read the footnotes, but this is going on a little bit long, and it's getting late. I purposely chose to forego the footnotes because I didn't want to interrupt the flow. But like every now and then, a footnote will show up citing a source for something that's noted by one of the characters. I think what I'm going to do is take a little break and then come back and read another part of the book. And I'll mark the break in the description. Okay, back. Let's see. All right. Yeah, I was gonna read the footnotes, but I'm kind of running out of time. Yeah, the end notes, they talk about Columbia City. I think I might read these in private, but if you read Sister Carrie on your own accord, there's a few footnotes that help explain the references that the characters are talking about. And there's some vocabulary that I had never heard of before in this novel, so that's always fun. Like a bunco steerer was another name for a con man who lured naive country visitors to places in the city where they could be swindled or robbed. A bunco steerer. Never heard of that. Con men abound in 19th century American fiction. Herman Melville and Mark Twain wrote comic fables about such crooks and the gullible people they duped. Yeah. And yeah, about the trolley strike. And Pierre, I don't want to butcher it, which Ames had recommended to her. Balzac's famous novel of 1834 is about a father who sacrifices all for his two selfish, ingrate daughters. Carrie is reading that novel rather than Dora Thorne as proof of her desire to improve herself culturally. The influence of Balzac's writing on Dreiser is something he referred to often. That's great. All right, inspired by Sister Carrie. The 1950s are regarded as the golden age of melodrama in American cinema, a time when such legendary directors as Douglas Sirk and Vincent Minnelli, two of whom I love, produced some of their best work. In 1952, William Wyler, another great one, released his superb Carrie, an adaptation of Theodore Dreiser's novel of urban plight, and it resonated strongly with contemporary moviegoers. Carrie stars Laurence Olivier as Hurstwood, Jennifer Jones as Carrie, and Eddie Albert as Drouet. Even though Dreiser named his novel after its female protagonist, critics have always found the author's rendering of Hurstwood's tragic downfall the most masterful portion of the book. The same sentiment has been expressed regarding Olivier's brilliant, show-stealing performance as the disgraced restaurant owner. He portrays Hurstwood's deep loneliness with grace and subtlety, his sad eyes and desolate expression reflecting his pain and despair. As Carrie, Jones gives a multifaceted performance that only gets better as the movie progresses. Jones shows vulnerability as well as hardness, revealing the emotional development Carrie undergoes during her difficulties and subsequent swift rise. Albert turns in a brilliant performance as Drouet, conveying the fundamental irresponsibility of the man while keeping him, despite his machinations, charming, friendly, and even likable. Miriam Hopkins is also excellent as the shrewish Julie Hurstwood. Carrie capably recreates the atmosphere of the growing cities of Chicago and New York at the turn of the 20th century. Wyler's direction is quiet and fluid, allowing the stories and characters to speak for themselves. The film earned Oscar nominations for art direction and costume design. For Carrie, Wyler teamed with screenwriters Ruth Goetz and Augustus Goetz. Married or brothers and sisters? The trio, because Wyler had earlier created an outstanding adaptation of Henry James's novel Washington Square entitled The Heiress, 1949, starring Olivia de Havilland in the title role and Montgomery Clift as her penniless suitor. Carrie was Wyler's fourth effort at bringing a classic novel to life. In 1936, he had adapted Dodsworth, based on the novel by Dreiser's fellow naturalist Sinclair Lewis. And in 1939, his famed version of Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights appeared, starring Olivier as the doomed Heathcliff opposite Merle Oberson's Cathy. The year before Carrie hit the theaters, George Stevens premiered his successful adaptation of a Dreiser novel with the celebrated A Place in the Sun, based on Place in the Sun, 1951, based on American Tragedy, 1925. I cannot get away from this movie. It featured superstars Clift and Elizabeth Taylor. Director Joseph von Sternberg had made the first film version of An American Tragedy in 1931. I did not know that. Comments and questions. Okay, this should be fun. In this section, we aim to provide the reader with an array of perspectives on the text, as well as questions that challenge those perspectives. The commentary has been culled from sources as diverse as reviews contemporaneous with the work, letters written by the author, literary criticism of later generations, and appreciations written throughout the work's history. Following the commentary, a series of questions seeks to filter Sister Carrie through a variety of points of view and bring about a richer understanding of this enduring work. Okay, let's see what people have to say. Comments. Theodore Dreiser. Well, the critics have not really understood what I was trying to do. Here is a book that is close to life. It is intended not as a piece of literary craftsmanship, but as a picture of conditions done as simply and effectively as the English language will permit. To sit up and criticize me for saying vest instead of waistcoat. To talk about my splitting the infinitive and using vulgar commonplaces here and there when the tragedy of a man's life is being displayed is silly. More, it is ridiculous. It makes me feel that American criticism is the joke which English literary authorities maintain it to be. But the circulation is beginning to bloom. When it gets to the people, they will understand, because it is the story of real life, of their lives. From the New York Times, January 15th, 1901. Good for you, Theodore. Split infinitives are still a problem, though. Denver Republican. The chief merit of Sister Carrie is its photographic descriptions of character. Scenes and incidents are freely localized. The book is unhealthful in tone, however, and its literary quality is not high enough to cover its faults of theme. January 20th, 1901. Literary quality is not high enough to cover its faults of theme. By the Denver Republican. Okay. So that wasn't a great one. Okay, let's see what Seattle Post-Intelligencer. Seattle Post-Intelligencer. The philosophy of Sister Carrie is very clear and very interesting. Its incidents, the squalid plane upon which its development takes place, will naturally prevent it from achieving a marked popularity. Even Mr. Dreiser's antiseptic style cannot make it anything but a most unpleasant tale, and you would never dream of recommending it to another person to read. These are not good reviews. January 20th, 1901. Okay. These are bad. London Daily Mail. At last, a really strong novel has come from America. Ooh, a rave. A novel almost great because of its relentless purpose, its power to compel emotion, its marvelous simplicity. If Mr. Theodore Dreiser obtains the success he deserves, then Sister Carrie should make the book not of one but many seasons. August 13th, 1901. Okay, so this is interesting. I just read some, two kind of dismal reviews. Here, let me lay down. Because I forgot when it debuted. Let's bring it up a little bit. I'm so sleepy. Let's see. When did Sister Carrie debut? Publication. Let's see. Okay. So Doubleday did the paltry bit were printed on November 8th, 1900, but the publisher made no effort to advertise the book. Okay. So this was the first incarnation was at the end of 1900. So this is when it was kind of floundering a little bit because it was held back by that bitch Doubleday. So this is where they were kind of hitching the dismalness wagon, but it took a while to kind of it fermented a while, and then it caught on to other people. But let's read the other reviews. Manchester Guardian. Rarely. Even in modern work have we met with characters so little idealized, so patiently presented. There is nothing of the showy development of the worst kind of psychological novel. Mr. Dreiser impresses us by his truthful sequence of events. He is strictly normal, and no fantastic light is shed on the credible steps of vice and crime. He is a faithful student, but his eyes are not fixed dully on the model. He might be called unimaginative by those who see no imagination in the insight which makes its deductions from experience, nor in that illuminating intelligence which controls a design. Ooh! The effect of the whole is perhaps a little depressing, yes, and Mr. Dreiser has not much charm of style, ouch. He has many happy phrases, but we are occasionally oppressed by such Americanisms as eyes snapping, or when he went home evenings the house looked nice. His work is faithful, acute, unprejudiced, and it should belong to the veritable documents of American history. Okay, so that was kind of a hodgepodge. August 14th, 1901. The Academy. These are publications reviewing the book. Sister Carrie has opened our eyes. It is a calm, reasoned, realistic study of American life in Chicago and New York, absolutely free from the slightest trace of sentimentality or prettiness, and dominated everywhere by a serious and strenuous desire for truth. August 24th, 1901. Theodore Watts Dunton. I need space. Throughout Sister Carrie, the phrasing is of the streets and bars, colloquial, familiar, vivid, slangy, unlovely, but intensely real. Of the manner of the book, it is not easy to speak favorably. It is strikingly unworthy of the matter thereof. Whilst large, dignified, and generous, the scheme of the story here told is not pretentious, or complex, or ambitious. It is a very plain tale of a plain, though eventful life. Between its covers, no single note of unreality is struck. It is untrammeled by any single concession to convention or tradition, literary or social. It is as compact of actuality as a police court record, and throughout its pages one feels pulsing the sturdy, restless energy of a young people, a cosmopolitan community, a nation busy upon the hither side of maturity. The book is, firstly, the full, exhaustive story of the half-equipped little knight's life and adventures. Secondly, it is a broad, vivid picture of men and manners in middle-class New York and Chicago. And thirdly, it is a thorough and really masterly study of the moral, physical, and social deterioration of one Hurstwood, a lover of the heroine. Upon all these counts is a creditable piece of work, faithful and real in the interest which pertains to genuinely realistic fiction. It is further of interest by reason that it strikes a keynote and is typical both in the faults of its manner and in the wealth and diversity of its matter, of the great country which gave it birth. From the Athenaeum, September 7th, 1901. Let's see. Ooh, we get other authors. Okay. New York Times Saturday Review. Theodore Dreiser's frankly realistic story called Sister Carrie, originally published 7 years ago, is now published by Messengers, B.W. Dodge and Company. I probably have that wrong. And deserves to be received as a new book, for it did not get a chance for recognition when it first appeared. To an extraordinary degree, the book is a photograph of conditions in the crude larger cities of America and of people who make these conditions and are made by them. There is no attempt to complicate the facts as they are with notions of things as they should be morally, or as they might be sentimentally or aesthetically. People's feelings are not considered. The author is quite impersonal. Withal, the story is interesting in spite of the commonplace character of the personages and the low plane of the gallery in which they move. It may be added that the story, even upon its first publication 7 years ago, attracted much attention and won favorable recognition in England. We do not, however, recommend the book to the fastidious reader, or the one who clings to old-fashioned ideas. It is a book one can very well get along without reading. May 25th, 1907. San Francisco Argonaut. When she eventually leaves Drouet and allows herself not quite unwillingly to be abducted by Hurstwood, a special scarlet label will describe the book as an immoral one, quite unsuited to the perusal of the young person and the boarding school miss. But these critics will have little to say in condemnation of the immorality of a commercial system which offers young girls a wage of $3 or $4 a week in payment for labor as destructive to the mind as to the body. Okay. August 3rd, 1907. Sherwood Anderson. Something great and bleak and hurtful that has been in the world almost forever is personified in Dreiser. From Little Review. April 1916. Very aptly named. H.L. Mencken. Yeah. Lay it on me, Henry. Dreiser's aim is not merely to record, but to translate and understand. The thing he exposes is not the empty event and act, but the endless mystery out of which it springs. His pictures have a passionate compassion in them that is hard to separate from poetry. If this sense of the universal and inexplicable tragedy, if this vision of life as a seeking without a finding, if this adept summoning up of moving images is mistaken by college professors for the empty, meticulous nastiness of Zola in Pot Boule, in Nietzsche's phrase, for the delight to stink, then surely the folly of college professors, as vast as it seems, has been underestimated. Reading that. His books remain, particularly his earliest books, and not all of the ranting of the outraged Orthodox will ever wipe them out. They were done in the stage of wonder. I said this before self-consciousness began to creep in and corrupt it. The view of life that got into Sister Carrie, the first of them, was not the product of deliberate thinking out of Carrie's problem. It simply got itself there by the force of the artistic passion behind it. I said all this. I swear I did not read this. Its coherent statement had to wait for other and more reflective days. This complete rejection of ethical plan and purpose, this manifestation of what Nietzsche used to call moral innocence, is what brought up the guardians of the national tradition at the Gallop, and created the Dreiser bugaboo of today. All the rubber stamp formulae of American fiction were thrown overboard in these earlier books. Instead of reducing the inexplicable to the obvious, they lifted the obvious to the inexplicable. One could find in them no orderly chain of causes and effects, of rewards and punishments. They represented life as a phenomenon at once terrible and unintelligible, like a stroke of lightning. The prevailing criticism applied to the moral litmus. They were not good. Ergo, they were evil. From Seven Arts, August 1917. Sinclair Lewis. Now, to me, as to many other American writers, Dreiser, more than any other man, marching alone, usually unappreciated, often hated, has cleared the trail from Victorian and Howellsian timidity and gentility in American fiction to honesty and boldness and passion of life. From The American Fear of Literature, 1930. Ford Madox Ford. And Dreiser has the gift of universality. If you like to call it Americanness, you can, in the sense that a sort of uniform spirit has overrun the Western world, so that they are eating nearly as many and nearly as filthy, indigestible canned products in Paris and London today as they are in Chicago. From Portraits from Life, 1937. I don't know that was a good review. Malcolm Cowley. Sister Carrie had the appearance of being a naturalistic novel and would be used as a model for the work of later naturalists. Yet it was, in a sense, naturalistic by default, naturalistic because Dreiser was writing about the life he knew best, in the only style he had learned. There is a personal and compulsive quality in the book that is not at all naturalistic. The book is felt rather than observed from the outside, like McTeague, and it is based on dreams rather than documents. Where McTeague had been a conducted tour of the depths, Sister Carrie was a cry from the depths, as if McTeague had uttered it. From New Republic, June 23, 1947. Lionel Trilling. Mr. Hicks knows that Dreiser is clumsy and stupid and bewildered and crude in his statement of materialistic monism. He knows that Dreiser in his personal life, which is in point because Henry James's personal life is always supposed to be so much in point, was not quite emancipated from his boyhood longings for crass material success, showing again and again a desire for the ostentatious luxury of the successful businessman. But Dreiser is to be accepted and forgiven because his faults are the sad, lovable, honorable faults of reality itself or of America itself. Huge, inchoate, struggling toward expression, caught between the dream of raw power and the dream of morality. From The Liberal Imagination, 1950. Saul Bellow. I often think the criticisms of Dreiser as a stylist at times betray a resistance to the feelings he causes readers to suffer. If they can say that he can't write, they need not experience these feelings. Ooh. From Commentary, May 1951. Robert Penn Warren. Sister Carrie was different from anything by William Dean Howells or Frank Norris. What was shocking here was not only Dreiser's unashamed willingness to identify himself with morally undifferentiated experience, or his failure to punish vice and reward virtue in his fiction, but the implication that vice and virtue might, in themselves, be mere accidents, mere irrelevances in this process of human life, and that the world was a great machine, morally indifferent. Ultimately, what shocked the world in Dreiser's work was not so much the things that he presented as the fact that he himself was not shocked by them. From Homage to Theodore, Dreiser, 1971. All right. Those were the comments. Here's the questions. Let's see. Okay. Questions for the reader. And there's 3 of them. It's not very in-depth, but here we go. Does Dreiser imply or describe an underlying cause for the economic disparities described in Sister Carrie? Something beyond individual fear and desire, something systematic? Does Dreiser imply or advocate a cure for these economic problems? If he offers no solution, does that diminish the power of his description or criticism? So, well, we're talking about 2 different things, but I think one of which is under the umbrella of the other. We're talking about a systemic problem where the screws are put to the masses, and it's up to the individuals of whether or not they will rise to the occasion to become unscrewed, essentially. That is kind of the playing field for the peons at the start. And I guess it's up to the individual to acknowledge that and then move forward, or acknowledge that and wither away to nothing because boohoo, life is unfair, capitalism sucks, and I'm a victim of it, and that's my role. Imply or advocate a cure for these economic problems. He does, in the sense that each individual is responsible for themselves, and can ascend much in the way those that are manipulative ascend. Because, as I've said before, all these characters are manipulative, but they are their backs are against the wall in some instances for survival. So they do what they can to ascend, no matter what the cost. It's not that extreme in this novel, but I think they definitely forgo morality for ascension. So, but beyond that, a cure for the economic problems? No, not really. Not in a society where the setup is a setup for you to fail, or it's a setup for you to be juiced as much as possible until you're dried up and then you're tossed into the garbage, but not before you've procreated and produced more worker bees and consumers. If he offers no solution, does that diminish the power of his description of criticism? No, because this is an ongoing thing, systemic oppression. It will, I think, always be a thing, sadly. And I think the book posits discussions about what it means to ascend, and by what means, and how the individual feels when they've arrived at such a place where they're supposed to be enlightened and illuminated and feel anything but. Because they bought into the program. They bought into the ideology that the more you accumulate, the better off you'll be. And that's not in line with human morality. It's the complete opposite. You did what you did to get what you got. You comprised yourself. You comprised like your moral core. You know deep down within you, unless you're a sociopath or without, a moral constitution, you know what you did to get what you got, and you know it's at the cost of other people. But you're set. You're fat and fed and sheltered and live in excess. You're fine. But you're fine in a world where everything else is not fine, essentially. And is that fine? No. I don't know. These could go in all different kinds of tangents, but let's finish these questions. If you were a good friend of Carrie's, someone who could speak to her frankly, what advice would you give her? I mean, it depends on what point in the book. That's a very broad question, because if I was a good friend of Carrie's, someone who could speak to her frankly, what I would say, don't fuck around with married men. Don't let men who use you as a prop jerk you around. I think I like that Drouet encouraged her, even if it was kind of like to his own gain, and it kind of backfired on him. What advice would I give? I don't think I would give her any advice, honestly. If she were to talk to me, if she had like a moral quandary of her behavior and was trying to check herself and we could talk it out, I would do that, but I don't think I'd have any advice to give her. Lola was a little objective, but Lola rode on Carrie's coattails. So she couldn't, you can't bite the hand that feeds you and expect to still be fed. I don't know. That's a good question. But again, it depends on at what point in the book. Because I would say, don't fuck around with a married man. Don't let. What advice would I give? Don't let. In Carrie's case, in this context, don't let dudes push you around. They're using you, as part of their ascension. They're using you as a possession. So, but you're using them as ascension too. But don't let them push you around. Would that have worked in that society at that time? No. Because everybody's out for themselves. Is Dreiser a good psychologist? Do his characters' motives, their responses to their situations or thoughts seem plausible or insightful? I think he's an anthropologist. Reading those tidbits in the introduction and the a note on hotels, homes, restaurants, and things. He was an anthropologist, and I think if you study people long enough and you study their behaviors and their interactions with other people, you can become learned in interpreting things. That feels like more like a sociologist than a psychologist when you're getting to the meat of the mind and what drives people. Yeah, there were many passages that were touching and were a little bit more in depth than like Carrie bought a hat and a skirt and a pair of shoes today. It wasn't all that in the novel. And I didn't, of course, I didn't mark the passages that were a little bit more in depth. But yeah, I think I wouldn't say he's a good psychologist. I think he was he was a good observer and interpreter of those observations. If that means he was a good psychologist, then yes. But do his characters motives responses? But they definitely seem plausible and insightful. Yeah, especially at the end of the novel, where not when he's damning Carrie, but when she's realizing her situation. He's talking about how damned she is. I think she's still realizing it. So yeah, I would say so. Those are kind of oddball questions, but they're interesting nonetheless. So, let's see. I think aside from that, I think that's the whole of the book. There's some passages from the pages of Sister Carrie. Let's see. I don't know if I want to read any of these. I've already read everything. No, I don't think so. Let me check the Wikipedia page. See if there's anything I wanted to read. I think there was a lot I wanted to say, and I kind of did, but Sister Carrie was a movement away from the emphasis of the morals of the Victorian era and focused more on realism and the base instincts of humans. I think with the influence of the morals of the Victorian era and people rebelling against them, Carrie went against social and moral norms of the time. Dreiser presented his characters without judging them. Dreiser fought against the censorship of Sister Carrie and brought about because Carrie engaged in affairs and other illicit sexual relationships without suffering any consequence. What? Should they stone her to death? This flouted prevailing norms that a character who practiced such sinful behavior must be punished in the course of the plot in order to be taught a lesson. What about the other people in the party of the liaisons? The married sort. You know, the married guy that took part in it. You want to brand him with a scarlet letter? Which I guess doesn't work. Fuck it. Dreiser sometimes has been criticized for writing style. Careless plots unimaginative. Okay. Alfred Kazin, while criticizing Dreiser, point out Dreiser novel has survived and remained influential works. And I realize they can't be branded because they were the married part. Let's see. I was reading the plot the other day, and I realized that I was kind of misinterpreting the novel as it was. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to wrap it up. She first becomes a mistress to men that she perceives as superior, but later becomes a famous actress. Kind of. Is a woman who is in a relatively long sexual and romantic relationship with someone who is married to a different person. Okay. 18-year-old Caroline Meaver's sister Carrie to her family takes a train to Chicago to live with her older sister Minnie and Minnie's husband on the train. Carrie meets Charles Rouet, a traveling salesman who is attracted to her because of her simple beauty and unspoiled manner. They exchange contact information, but upon discovering the steady round of toil and somber atmosphere at her sister's flat, she writes to Rouet, discourages him from calling on her there. Carrie soon finds a job in a shoe factory and gives most of her meager salary to Hanson's room and board. One day after an illness costs her job, she encounters Rouet. He persuades her to leave a dull, constricted life and to move in with him. To press his case, he slips Carrie two $10 bills, opening a vista of material possibilities to her. The next day, he rebuffs her feeble attempt to return the money and retain her virtue, taking her shopping at a Chicago department store and buying her a jacket and some shoes That night, she was in with them. Drouet installs her in a much nicer apartment. She gradually sheds her provincial mannerisms by the time he introduces her to George Hurstwood, the manager of Fitzgerald and Moy's, a respectable bar that Drouet describes as a way up swell place. Her material appearance has improved considerably. Hurstwood, a married man with a social climbing wife, 20-year-old son, and 17-year-old daughter, becomes infatuated with Carrie. They start an affair, meeting secretly while Drouet is on a business trip. One night, Drouet casually agrees to find an actress to play Laura in an amateur theatrical presentation of Augustin Daly's melodrama Under the Gaslight for his local chapter of the Elks. He encourages a hesitant Carrie to take the part. Carrie turns out to have acting talent, and her ambition is born. Initially, she falls victim to stage fright, but Drouet's encouragement between acts enables her to give a fine performance that rivets the audience's attention and inflames Hurstwood's passion. He then decides to take Carrie away from Drouet. The next day, Drouet finds out about the affair, and Hurstwood's wife, Julia, learns that Hurstwood has been seen with another woman. Hurstwood makes advances, and when Carrie asks if he will marry her, he says yes. Later, Drouet confronts Carrie and informs her that Hurstwood is married, then walks out on her. After a night of drinking and despairing at his now emboldened wife's demands and Carrie's rejection letter, Hurstwood finds that the safe Fitzgerald and Moy's offices has accidentally been left unlocked. When he inadvertently locks the safe after taking the money out, he drunkenly panics and steals the day's proceeds, more than 10 grand. Under the false pretext of Drouet's sudden illness, he lures Carrie onto a train and takes her to Canada. In Montreal, Hurstwood is found by a private investigator. He returns most of the stolen funds to avoid prosecution. Hurstwood mollifies Carrie by arranging a marriage ceremony, but he is still married to Julia. The couple move to New York City. They rent a flat where they live as George and Carrie Wheeler. Hurstwood buys a minority interest in the saloon, and initially he can provide Carrie with an adequate, if not lavish, lifestyle. The couple grow distant, however, as their finances do not improve. Carrie's dissatisfaction only increases when she makes friends with Mrs. Vance, a neighbor whose husband is prosperous. Through Mrs. Vance, Carrie meets Robert Ames, a young scholar from Indiana and her neighbor's cousin, who introduces her to the idea that great art, rather than showy materialism, is worthy of admiration. After only a few years, the saloon's landlord sells the property, and Hurstwood's business partner decides to terminate the partnership. Too proud to accept any of the limited job opportunities available to him, Hurstwood watches his savings dwindle. He urges Carrie to economize, which she finds humiliating and distasteful. As Hurstwood sinks into apathy, Carrie becomes a chorus girl through her good looks. While he deteriorates, she rises from the chorus to two small roles. Her performance as a minor, non-speaking character, frowning Quakeress, greatly amuses the audience and makes the play a hit. She is befriended by Lola Osborne, another chorus girl, who urges Carrie to become her roommate, opportunist. In a final attempt to earn money, Hurstwood becomes a scab, driving a Brooklyn streetcar during a streetcar operator strike. His ill-fated venture lasts only 2 days, ending after a couple of violent encounters with the strikers. Carrie, unaware of Hurstwood's reason for quitting, leaves him. Hurstwood ultimately becomes one of the homeless of New York, taking odd jobs, falling ill with pneumonia, and finally becoming a beggar. He ultimately commits suicide in a flop house. Carrie achieves stardom, but finds that even with fame and fortune, she is lonely and unhappy. And this is from the Wikipedia page for Sister Carrie. And that's it. I don't know that I never have anything in depth because I didn't take notes when I was reading it. I was just reading it. I do think it is a good novel. And I was saying yesterday, it is a little long-winded, but I do believe a lot of the prose is from young ambition, like I think Mencken was saying. He was finding his way to express his ideas through the novel form. And although it's lengthy and long-winded, I could endure it and did endure it, and I did like it. I was thinking today about the the prospect of, or the criticisms of this book, that um, people could interpret this as, oh, all women are evil and ruin men's lives. It's like, I think most of these characters are self-serving. I think the men are just as culpable as the women are, in terms of like ruining their lives. A lot of actions set forth are based in questionable judgment by the men. I think Drouet would have been the most redeemable character had he not been a user himself. I don't think he deserved what he got out of the situation, but he definitely condescended and patronized Carrie and used her. I don't think he was good to her. I don't think Hurstwood was good to her or for her, and I don't think any of the men, except perhaps Ames, the one sounding voice, the unattainable Ames in the story, was probably like the beacon, the lighthouse of the book. And Carrie herself, I don't think she's evil, but I do think she has motives that are partly selfish and partly, some are for survival, but she finds that through indulging like a kind of easy success, easy money, she's unfulfilled. And I first started thinking about that concept seriously when I was watching that documentary on Eugene O'Neill. Eugene O'Neill, his father was James O'Neill, the great actor that was born in extreme poverty in Ireland, right? Yeah. And he rose to prominence as a great actor. He became extremely popular doing The Count of Monte Cristo. And emboldened by the success of the play, he succumbed to doing the play, buying the play, traveling with the play, and then ultimately becoming a prisoner of the play. He became so popular because of the play, nobody wanted to see him in anything else, and he can never, I was going to say foregone or forsake. I'm trying to say he gave up his acting potential, his acting talent for easy money. And on his deathbed, he had, as Christopher Plummer was narrating, bitter recriminations of a fluff life. He took the easy way. And I think it's very difficult for me to judge somebody that comes from not just nothing, but like less than nothing, and found a way to make, not just to make a living, but have means beyond the likes of which you ever dreamed of. And if you lived in extreme poverty, I don't know to what depths. I don't know if he was living on the street or let's see, James O'Neill. Let's see, born in County Kilkenny, Ireland. Yeah, I don't know if there's a biography of him or not, but it bore in him a drive to ascend from where he was, and he did not want to struggle all his life. It's hard for me to judge somebody born in such an extreme to then see actual merits of work before you become a prisoner to it. Run with it. I think the pendulum swung from one, side of the grandfather clock to the other and just stayed there. And there was no real growth because of it. I think when you have nothing and then you come into something, depending on how you come into it, it's very hard to reject that. And I can't blame people for that. But at the end of it, there was no fulfillment. The thing that you were striving for, the thing that you thought would bring you fulfillment, didn't, and you feel lonelier than ever. Because if that didn't work, then what does? And I'm not going to say that Carrie arrived at a place of despair more than Hurstwood. I think Hurstwood, the result of Hurstwood is a little bit bizarre to me, but I guess it could be said that his moral fiber had snapped, and you can't go back once you steal from your employer or you screw over your family or all the wrongs that you did. You see that they're karmically sentenced to where people you've wronged are doing well, and you naturally fall into your sentence, which is to suffer. But I'm not quite sure what to think of it. But all in all, it's a great novel. I don't know when or if I'll read it again, because there's a lot of other novels I'd like to read, but I'm glad I read it. Sister Carrie, Theodore, Dreiser, 1900. First at Doubleday, who held him back, and then at another publisher who didn't. And I'm glad to see he went on to be a success. And I think that's, unless I mention it in future videos, that's all I'm going to really talk about it. It's good. Good novel. And if you want a more in-depth analysis of it, I'm sure there's other channels that do that. But in the meantime, thanks for listening.